Imagine tracking 1,500 people for 20 solid years.
I mean, it is a massive longitudinal study.
Right. And they did this just to see who actually manages to become a millionaire.
And the results they found are, well, they're incredibly humbling, honestly.
Yeah, because at the end of those 2 decades, out of 1,500 people, only 83 made the cut.
Wow. Just 83.
Just 83. And the kicker here is that they didn't start out rich.
Right. They weren't trust fund kids.
Exactly. They weren't necessarily the smartest people in the room either. You know, they didn't all have the highest IQs or the best Ivy League degrees, but they all shared this one highly specific operating system.
Yeah, and that operating system is exactly what we are unpacking today. We're looking at the research of Brian Tracy.
A classic.
Totally. Specifically, we're pulling apart his classic framework, the 10 C's of success.
Now, for anyone listening right now who might be rolling their eyes thinking, this sounds like some dusty 1980s motivational tape telling you to just hustle harder.
Right, the whole rise and grind thing.
Exactly. We need to completely reframe that.
Yeah.
Because we are living in an era of chronic information overload.
Absolutely.
Especially for Gen Z, or really just anyone navigating this modern digital economy. You wake up, you look at a screen, and suddenly you are paralyzed by 1,000 different directions.
It is a recipe for total digital burnout.
Yeah.
I mean, it really is. And Brian Tracy's fundamental thesis actually cuts right through that modern noise.
How so?
Well, he argues that success isn't magic, and it's not a genetic lottery either.
Yeah.
It is simply a predictable set of mechanical habit patterns.
Mechanical habit patterns. I like that.
If you study what successful people do and you just adopt those habits, success essentially becomes a predictable mathematical output.
But the flip side is that if you are missing even one of these 10 qualities, it creates a weak link.
Precisely.
And that single weak link can completely cap your potential no matter how much raw effort you're throwing at your screen every single day.
Exactly. You can hustle all you want, but a broken system is a broken system.
So our mission for you today in this deep dive is to extract the actual mechanics of these 10 C's. We want to see how we can apply them directly to our hyper-distracted, chronically online lives.
Which means we have to start at the foundation. You cannot optimize an operating system if you don't know what program you're actually trying to run.
That is so true. And that brings us to our first C, which is clarity.
Clarity.
Tracy points out that human beings are fundamentally goal-seeking organisms. Like, we literally malfunction without direction.
He estimates that a massive percentage of modern unhappiness, hostility, and even, like, psychosomatic illnesses, they all stem from a lack of clear direction.
Really? Psychosomatic illnesses?
Yeah, it's wild. If you aren't working towards something meaningful to you, your brain just sort of spins in circles and it causes actual stress.
And here's where Tracy offers this highly specific tactic that feels, honestly, it feels like a cheat code.
Oh, I know exactly what you're going to say.
Yeah, let's call it the handwriting hack. He insists that you have to write your goals down on physical paper.
Not in a notes app.
No, not typed on a laptop. Physical paper. And you have to write them in the present tense as if they've already happened.
Like, I am a self-made millionaire by 2025.
Right. Or, I am a lead software engineer. Something highly specific.
And Tracy attributes this to activating what he calls the superconscious mind, or creating this dynamism in your brain.
The superconscious mind. It sounds a little mystical.
It does. But if we strip away the mystical terminology and look at modern cognitive science, it makes perfect sense.
Okay, unpack that for us. What's actually happening?
What you are actually doing is programming your reticular activating system, your RAS.
Explain the RAS for us, because that definitely sounds a lot more tangible than a superconscious energy field.
For sure. So the RAS is a bundle of nerves at our brainstem. And its whole job is to filter out unnecessary information so only the important stuff gets through.
Because there's just too much sensory data coming in all the time.
Exactly. Your brain is highly literal. When you physically write down, I am a millionaire, in your own handwriting, you force a massive cognitive dissonance.
Oh, because your brain knows your bank account is empty.
Right. Your brain knows the reality, but your physical action of writing it out says otherwise. That friction commands your RAS to wake up.
So it starts scanning your environment.
24/7. It scans for resources, conversations, and opportunities to close that gap between reality and what you wrote down.
So it's not magic at all. It's literally just forcing your brain's filtering system to care about your goal.
Exactly.
It reminds me of, you know, when you buy a specific car or you're thinking about buying a specific car.
And suddenly you see that exact car everywhere on the highway.
Yes. everywhere.
Precisely.
Yeah.
That's your RAS in action. But, knowing your destination is really only half the battle in a digital world.
Right, because distractions are everywhere.
Exactly. Once that internal filter is set, you have to relentlessly protect it.
Which brings us to the ultimate boss fight for the modern worker, honestly. Concentration.
Oh, absolutely.
Tracy defines this as working single-mindedly on one task until it is complete. You ignore the emails, the notifications, the endless scrolling.
And he frames it ruthlessly, too. He says, time management is life management.
That's intense.
It is. If you are doing anything other than working on the absolute top priority item on your list, you are quite literally wasting your life in that moment.
Wow. But it makes sense because every time you switch tasks to check a notification, you incur this massive cognitive penalty.
Exactly. It takes so much energy to get back into flow.
But let's be real. Telling someone today to just focus is like telling someone in a hurricane to stay dry.
It's impossible.
Yeah. So mechanically, how do we actually achieve that kind of single-minded concentration?
Well, it comes down to environmental design. You cannot rely on sheer willpower to ignore a buzzing phone.
Willpower is a myth anyway.
Pretty much. You have to remove the stimulus entirely, put the phone in another room, block the distracting websites on your router.
You have to engineer an environment where the easiest thing to do is your top priority.
Exactly. Make the right choice, the easiest choice.
Okay, so you've programmed your brain's filter with clarity, and you've locked your phone in a drawer to maintain concentration.
A great start.
But the minute you step out into the real world, things get incredibly messy. Unprecedented problems pop up all the time.
Right. You can't plan for everything.
Which is why Tracy argues that blind hustle has to be tempered by taking a beat to actually think. And that brings us to our next C.
Common sense.
It is.
And this is where he points to a Gallup survey of 1,500 highly successful people in Marquee Who's Who.
Okay.
When asked to name the single most important quality for success, the nearly unanimous answer was just common sense.
Common sense. That sounds almost insultingly simple.
It really does.
Yeah.
But Tracy defines failure in a very specific structural way. He calls it action without thinking.
Oh, action without thinking.
Yeah, and we see this constantly today. People are moving incredibly fast. They're reacting to every micro trend, firing off responses on Slack or social media without taking a single breath.
So common sense is just the mechanical act of taking a pause to think things through before you move.
That's it.
It's also about learning to trust your own innate intuition, right?
Yes, absolutely.
Tracy argues that your intuition usually gives you the exact right answer if you just get quiet enough to actually hear it over the noise of other people's opinions.
Exactly. It's an internal calibration. You have to learn to trust your gut.
Wait, okay, let me play devil's advocate here.
Right.
If I'm a coder or a financial analyst or I work in logistics,
Right.
my boss isn't exactly paying me to sit quietly and trust my intuition, you know? They expect me to solve complex, novel problems.
Sure.
Doesn't that require a level of creativity that goes beyond basic common sense?
It does, and that raises a fascinating distinction about how Tracy defines creativity, which is our next C.
Okay, lay it on me.
He firmly believes every single human being has a genius-level capacity for creativity. Because in this context, creativity isn't about, like, painting a mural or writing a symphony.
Right, it's not about being artsy.
Not at all. Creativity is curiosity. It is the willingness to ask basic, almost childlike questions about how things work.
Like looking at a legacy business process that everyone just accepts and asking, why do we actually do it this way?
Yes. The people we consider the smartest in their fields are usually the ones asking the most elementary questions.
That's so true.
And Tracy shares a staggering metric to back this up. He says 80% of everything we use, our software, our vehicles, our business models, will be entirely obsolete or radically different in 5 years.
80% in 5 years. Change is moving that fast.
It's exponential.
So clinging to the old way of doing things is a guaranteed way to become obsolete yourself.
Exactly. A creative person is simply someone who is flexible enough to drop their old assumptions the second new contradictory data arrives.
And according to the research he cites, you don't need to invent the next iPhone to get rich either.
No, not at all.
You only need an idea that is 10% new, 10% faster, 10% cheaper, 10% easier.
That's the magic number. You don't reinvent the wheel, you just look at the wheel and ask, how can I make this roll slightly smoother?
But, you know, having that 10% better idea requires you to actually know how the wheel works in the first place.
Right.
An idea is totally useless if you don't have the undeniable skill to execute it. And this is where Tracy drops a pretty heavy truth bomb about competence.
Oh yeah, he does not sugarcoat this part.
Not at all. He states plainly that in our highly competitive landscape, unless you plan on winning the lottery, you haven't got a chance unless you commit to becoming excellent.
Average is no longer a safe place to be.
No, you have to aim for the top 5 or 10% in your chosen field.
Okay, but telling someone to aim for the top 5% is great on a bumper sticker.
Right.
But mechanically, how does a person actually get there?
Well, you get there through our next C, continuous learning.
Continuous learning. Okay.
You don't just put your head down and work blindly. You actively study your field for 60 to 90 minutes every single day.
Every day.
Yeah.
That is a serious commitment.
It is. You build feedback loops. You look at what the top performers are doing, you analyze the specific gap between their skill and yours, and you deliberately practice to close that gap.
The source material brings up Warren Buffett here, doesn't it?
It does, and it's a crazy stat. The guy reads 500 pages a day, every day.
It's like 5 to 8 hours of just absorbing information.
And his partners attribute his historical wealth entirely to that specific habit. It's a relentless consumption of new data.
But let's be real.
Mm-hmm.
Almost nobody listening to this has 5 hours a day to sit in a leather chair and read financial reports.
Definitely not. We are commuting, we are working, we are at the gym.
Which is why Tracy gave advice that was highly prescient. Back in the day, he originally said you should never listen to the radio in your car.
Right.
In fact, he said you shouldn't even know how your radio works. Instead, you should use educational audio programs.
And if we update that for today's listener, it's really about curating your digital diet. We all have these pockets of dead time. You know, you're on the subway or you're folding laundry or walking the dog.
Right.
Instead of defaulting to a TikTok doom scrolling session, you turn that 30 minutes into a mobile university.
A mobile university. I love that phrasing.
Yeah, you put on an audiobook or a podcast that teaches you something about your industry. Because tying it back to creativity, just one new idea you hear on a Tuesday morning commute could be that 10% improvement that changes the trajectory of your entire career.
But absorbing all that knowledge and building that level of competence isn't a quick fix.
No, it's not.
You are playing a long game. And frankly, in a culture that worships the 22-year-old startup billionaire or the overnight viral sensation, playing a 10-year-long game feels agonizing.
It goes against all our modern wiring for instant gratification. We want the results yesterday.
Exactly. But this is where Tracy introduces consistency.
Consistency.
He talks about being dependable and predictable. Random, erratic flashes of brilliance will always lose out over the long term to someone who simply shows up and executes reliably every single day.
He ties this to a universal principle he calls the law of accumulation, right?
Yes. It's the idea that every massive accomplishment is actually just the byproduct of thousands of tiny, completely unseen efforts.
It makes me think of compounding interest in an investment account.
That's a great way to look at it.
Or like how a single drop of water doesn't do much on its own, but a steady, consistent drip over millions of years will literally carve out the Grand Canyon.
That is a perfect mechanical metaphor. It's not the sheer force of the water, it is the consistency. Those tiny actions gather a massive momentum of their own over time.
But staying consistent for years requires a massive amount of fuel.
It really does.
You can't fake that kind of drive forever. Which brings us to commitment.
Now, Tracy takes a highly uncompromising stance here that I think we need to look at objectively.
Yeah, he does.
He compares uncommitted workers to rotten apples in a barrel, saying they cause trouble within an organization.
Right. It is a very harsh mid-century corporate perspective.
Very old school.
And honestly, if you are listening to this while working a grueling gig economy job or taking a night shift just to pay rent, being called a rotten apple because you aren't deeply passionate about, like, data entry is incredibly alienating.
Absolutely. We aren't here to endorse that framing. Tracy's ruthless stance is definitely a product of its time. But if we extract the underlying mechanism and update it for today's gig economy, the core insight is actually really valuable.
How so?
It's really about energy drain. If you are spending 8 to 10 hours a day actively masking your apathy, forcing yourself to do something you absolutely despise, that friction consumes all your mental bandwidth.
Oh man, you have zero energy left at the end of the day to build the life you actually want.
Exactly. True success requires you to find a niche where the work itself generates energy for you, rather than draining it.
Emerson noted that every great achievement is the triumph of enthusiasm.
Yes. You have to find work you can lose yourself in wholeheartedly.
This reminds me of the incredible anecdote from Dr. Shirley Blotnick's study, the one we mentioned at the very beginning of the deep dive.
Oh, the guy who started out cleaning toilets.
Yes, cleaning toilets on the night shift for an airline.
He found an industry he loved, and he completely committed to it.
Yeah, he stayed with that same airline for 35 years. He just steadily, consistently worked his way up, maintaining total commitment to the organization.
And over 3 decades later, he became the president of the airline, making nearly $2 million a year.
And importantly, Tracy notes that the man conservatively held on to his money, letting it accumulate, which is the actual final step of building wealth.
It's a profound testament to what happens when you combine consistency with deep commitment.
It really is. But let's be totally honest with each other here.
Okay.
If you are playing a 35-year-long game, or even trying to survive a 5-year grind, you are going to get hit.
Oh, inevitably.
You are going to face massive setbacks, rejection, and just crippling self-doubt.
Which is why the final 2 C's in Tracy's operating system are all about forging mental armor, starting with courage.
Courage. Winston Churchill famously called courage the foremost of the virtues because it's the one that guarantees all the others.
And Tracy makes a critical distinction here that completely changes how you view bravery.
What's the distinction?
Courageous people are not fearless. They are not walking around immune to anxiety.
Right, they're terrified, just like the rest of us.
Exactly. They simply treat fear as something to be mastered rather than something to be avoided. Tracy quotes Mark Twain, "Do the thing you fear, and the death of fear is certain."
The death of fear is certain.
Yeah, fear is largely a habit. If your default response is to back away when you feel intimidated, backing away becomes your ingrained habit pattern.
But if you force yourself to step forward into the discomfort, confronting the fear becomes the habit.
Precisely. And usually when you actually confront the thing you are dreading, whether it's the fear of failure, the fear of public speaking, or just looking foolish, it just evaporates into smoke.
Tracy tells this great personal story about a conversation he had with his girlfriend before they were married.
I remember this one.
Yeah, she asked him, "Brian, what is your best quality?" And he thought about it and gave a fascinating answer. He didn't say his intelligence or his work ethic. He said, "I never give up."
And that is the second crucial half of courage.
Right. There is the initial courage to begin to launch the risky project or apply for the job you aren't quite qualified for.
But the second part is unshakable persistence. You have to mechanically program yourself to never quit.
Because logically, if you refuse to quit, the only mathematical alternative left is that you must eventually succeed.
It's a numbers game. Which brings us to the ultimate piece of the puzzle, the armor that holds this entire operating system together.
The 10th and final C, confidence.
Confidence. So how do we actually build it? Because you can't just snap your fingers and be confident.
No, you can't. Tracy brings up a quote from the author Dorothea Brand from a book she wrote back in 1935 called Wake Up and Live.
Okay.
She wrote, "Go confidently in the direction of your dreams and act as though it were impossible to fail."
Act as though it were impossible to fail. If we look at the behavioral psychology behind that statement, it is incredibly profound.
Right, because most of us operate under the assumption that our feelings dictate our actions.
Like, I don't feel confident today, so I'm not going to speak up in this meeting.
Exactly. We wait for the feeling to arrive before we do the thing.
But Tracy highlights a core psychological truth. Your true beliefs are only ever expressed in your actions.
Yes.
It is not what you think or intend. It is what your physical body actually does.
This is essentially the scientific backing for fake it till you make it.
Pretty much.
If you don't feel confident or you don't feel courageous, you literally act the part. You play a character.
You pretend. The psychology proves that if you artificially adopt the behaviors of a confident person, if you walk, talk, and make decisions like an unstoppable success, even while your internal monologue is screaming with self-doubt, those physical actions will eventually generate the corresponding emotions.
It sinks all the way down to the bottom of your soul. You don't wait for the feeling to take action. You take the action, and the feeling is forced to catch up.
It's the ultimate hack for the human operating system.
It really is. So let's take a breath and look at the complete architecture we've just laid out.
The 10 C's of success.
Right. We start by dropping the GPS pin with clarity, using the handwriting hack to program our brain's filtering system.
We guard that goal with single-minded concentration by designing our environment to block the digital noise.
We apply common sense to pause and think before we react.
And we use creativity to remain intensely curious and flexible.
We build undeniable competence to hit that top 5%, fueled by continuous learning, swapping, or doom scrolling for a mobile university.
Love that. And we rely on consistency to let our tiny actions carve the canyon.
Yes, and we find a niche that commands our full commitment, so we aren't draining our energy on things we hate.
Finally, we protect the journey with courage by treating fear as a habit to be broken.
And we lock it all in with confidence by acting the part until the feelings become reality.
That is a solid system.
Here is the most liberating takeaway from this entire deep dive, in my opinion. The surgeon, the CEO, the self-made millionaire, they didn't descend from Olympus with magical powers.
No, they just learned how to run a different, predictable operating system.
They internalize these habit patterns, and because they are just mechanical habits, anybody can practice them. You can practice them today.
Exactly.
But before you go, here's one last thing to ponder. We just spent this entire deep dive talking about the exact mechanics of achieving success.
Right.
But Tracy's system implies something much deeper. If success is truly just a predictable set of mechanical habits, then failure isn't a deep, permanent character flaw.
Oh, that's interesting.
It's not who you are. It's just a typo in your code.
A typo in the code. I love that.
It's just a glitch in the habit loop that you can easily rewrite.
That is a very empowering way to look at it.
So,
Yeah.
if you stripped away all the guilt and the shame of failing, what goal would you write down on a physical piece of paper today? Drop the pen. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. Keep asking questions and keep learning.